Note: all following footage is from the first dungeon to keep spoilers to a minimum. If you want to experience it for yourself, feel free to let this play in the background instead. That said, I will touch on a few details vaguely here and there, so please keep this in mind. If you want to go in completely blind, skip to the timestamp on screen for my final verdict. The biggest difference narratively from Persona 5 is that the villains are much more complex. While one of Persona 5's themes was how people could overindulge and then some on personal vices if no one was around to keep them in check, Strikers focuses on them much more as tragic figures who only wanted to make something of themselves and went too far. In fact, it reminds me quite a bit of the moral quandary of Persona 5 Royal's third semester, with one target in particular. If you understand who I'm talking about, I hope you'll agree. As a whole, Strikers tackle some interesting and powerful concepts, both narratively and mechanically, based on the original's world building, which I absolutely love to see. Each jail also ties into the personal arc of at least one of the thieves. This is more obvious early on, but it's still very compelling to see how the thieves deal with the monarch's actions and try to help each other when they feel down. As an aside, I found it interesting that the thieves' circumstances are near spot on to how people have headcanoned them being in fanworks and discussions, from simple stuff like Haru studying management and taking side courses in crop cultivation, to more subtle things like Ryuji and Morgana still bickering but having an underlying respect for one another. It all caught me by surprise, but it just goes to show how rich and lovable they are, and that's no different in Strikers. Also, considering the thieves end up in different places between the vanilla and royal endings of the original, I appreciated the vagueness of each member's situation here as well, despite royal and Strikers being developed at the same time. That foresight was greatly appreciated, but speaking personally, an offhand mention that it's a shame the Yoshizawas are on a trip of their own, or something along those lines in optional dialogue or the opening text messages, would have been just as valued too, at least in the English version, since localization apparently began last April, a full month after Royal's Western release. It would have been an easy way to give Kasumi a shout out, even if it was too late to include her in the story or gameplay itself. As for the new cast, they mesh with the current perfectly as well. Sophia is just a pure bundle of innocence and a unique, at least to me, take on the robot learns about emotion story, where instead of lacking feelings entirely, she has them but has to recognize them instead, similar to Violet Evergarden for those who've seen or read her story. Her sheer bluntness in the beginning is quite shocking actually, but seeing Sophia's own take on things and her growth, along with her childlike wonder and her interactions with the group, is truly a sight to see. It helps that she's so sweet and has so many emotional beats to her story too. Zenkichi is another fantastic addition who acts as a great foil to the thieves who, despite the things they've seen, are still fairly optimistic about things, due to his work in public security and having 30-odd years on them all. I honestly didn't expect an adult to ever share the spotlight in a Persona title, since that hasn't happened since Persona 2, but his presence is so refreshing to see. It helps that he has such a strong and relatable story arc and chemistry with the others, much like Sophia, as well as a wholly unique persona, both in terms of background and abilities, and fighting style, as if to further emphasize his experience over the others. The only regret I have is the aforementioned co-development this had with Royal. I think Kasumi and Sophia would have gone along great, for example, if this had entered production after the latter, while Zenkichi could have had some very interesting opinions about Akechi. But considering the sequel hooks in Royal, I'm sure we will have at least one more entry with the Persona 5 cast before moving on to Persona 6, so hopefully we'll see the two subsets come together then. This had a functional impact too, though, with both Sophia and Kasumi specializing in bless attacks, while Zenkichi gets a completely unique playstyle. The two girls' playstyles differ greatly though. One is physical and focuses on critical damage, while the other is magical with strong healing spells. So it could have been worse, but the strong overlap is unfortunately still there. Now, as expected of a Persona title, the music is fantastic. It's difficult to put into words, but the sound team did a perfect job of blending Persona 5's music style with Koei Tecmo's heavy rock, with some tracks either taken directly from or sounding as if they were taken directly from Persona 5, some feeling like a mix between the two styles, and others feeling wholly new, as if to highlight moments where the thieves feel out of their depth. I honestly can't stress enough how perfectly the jail themes match them, either. To use two early examples, the first jail is based on an Alice in Wonderland-inspired amusement park, so the music sounds like something you'd hear at one of those, albeit with some unsettling undertones. Another jail is set around a castle in the middle of winter, and the music would fit right at home in a musical like The Nutcracker. And to tease some later jails, some even incorporate horror themes that really fit the sense of unease surrounding them. Essentially, each jail's music sets their mood spectacularly. Strikers even did the impossible by introducing a battle theme that surpassed even Rivers in the Desert. The new track shows up in a similar way too, almost as if intentionally drawing parallels between the two, and, well, yeah, it's incredible. This doesn't include the final boss themes though. A Royal still has that category on lock for now, if we're including those. As for the combat, which I suppose in a regular review should have been the first thing that came up, the combat actually isn't at all what I was expecting. If you too were expecting Koei Tecmo's trademark 1 vs 1000 style, as in their own Warriors series or other crossovers like Hyrule Warriors, you're going to be mistaken, as the combat is much smaller in scope, outside of a few set pieces which do throw the hundreds and thousands of mooks you've come to expect. The focus is more on managing your skills and resources, with ambushes returning from Persona 5 to help make encounters easier for yourself. I admit I was still overwhelmed at first though, with so many elements to keep track of, both figuratively and literally, and the fact that when enemies are using them, each elemental attack takes on a unique form. For example, wind skills form tornadoes that follow you around, while fire skills rain down fireballs. On the other hand, all physical skills are near unique and inspired by the visual effects they produce in Persona 5 or their names, such as Heatwave firing out a wave of fiery-looking energy. I adore the attention to detail, but man was it a struggle to keep it all in mind. Another strange choice was to double the cost of early spells. For example, Ahar, the most basic curse attack, normally costs 4 SP, but here it costs 8. I really don't understand why it was done, as the percentage increase in cost decreases further along each skill line, but it made early resource management pretty difficult. But, and this part goes double for anyone who's familiar with Persona's usual calendar system, you can leave and re-enter jails in the same day. Despite being told there were no negative consequences in an early tutorial for leaving partway, I was so set in my ways I honestly didn't believe it until I tried it partway through the second jail. Leaving and re-entering refills your HP and stamina and resets the security level, but it isn't as broken as you would think, considering how many enemies can be found between each checkpoint and that they all reset, and the fact that it also resets your showtime gauge, which fuels your finisher attacks. Oh, and another diversion from Royal and its palaces. I was worried that jails would get too formulaic, especially because they take longer to complete than palaces, but thankfully this isn't the case in the slightest. After a while they start getting mixed up, with different requirements for each one's completion, which kept everything feeling fresh. I commend the team's foresight and design philosophy on this, especially with how well each jail is tailored around the story surrounding it. Another interesting consequence of Strikers being developed alongside Royal is that both titles are optimized the Persona experience in different ways. Royal's improvements are well known at this point because they touched on almost everything, but for all the features Strikers left out from Royal, such as being able to run in the real world, it adds in huge time savers like the ability to visit the Velvet Room directly from the hideout or various checkpoints in jails, and access your menu while in said Velvet Room interface, or delete personas while browsing it, which is a dream come true for people who like optimizing their builds, such as myself, as well as the ability to enter LeBlanc during the day without skipping to the evening time slot, and to shuffle party member skills freely, which originally you needed to use a facility like the Kanda Church for. I hope whatever entry comes next merges both of these branches of changes into one. And to be honest, there's also a weird similarity to Age of Calamity too, so I guess whoever worked on this also had serious clout in that project as well. It's probably unintentional, but it was still weird to see. Again, if you know what I'm talking about, you hopefully feel the same way. But going back to the time saving mentioned earlier, that's another thing Strikers changes. Progression is much more linear now, with everything happening on set dates instead of you being given deadlines as before, which fits the tighter schedule the thieves are working with this time. The Confidant system has also been revamped, now being replaced by the Bond system, which gains experience when you would normally rank up a Confidant, for example during story events, where you would normally rank up, say, a full Arcana in Persona 5. This Bond system then allows you to spend the points you earn on perks like extra stats or discounts at the store, just like with the Confidant perks before. Both of these make Strikers its own entity while still staying true to the feel of Persona 5, and I'd be very interested to see this approach in the future. A word to the wise though, Strikers' controls are much more traditional than Persona 5's. For example, triangle being the save button and options opening the menu instead of it being the other way around before, and circle being used to interact with things, though that's more to do with traditional Japanese controls. These make sense since triangle and X are used for combat and traversal, and having one unifying control scheme is important, but expect to get those mixed up repeatedly when your Persona 5 muscle memory kicks in. Even after 80 odd hours, I still make those mistakes. But in addition to the traditional controls, Strikers also mixes things up by including a post-game. While location-specific requests, included as part of Strikers' take on the original's fansite request, are lost forever, you can still explore the different jails and tackle jail-specific requests, which is another greatly welcomed feature. There's even a traditional New Game Plus that lets you pick up exactly where you left off with your full party, both in terms of teammates and your Persona roster, which is a feature I and many others wished was in Royal, at least for Kasumi considering how little time you get with her canonically in the story. Again, hopefully this is something Atlus keeps in mind for future projects. And one last aside, if I may, if there's one feature that I'd like Atlus to include in the new entry, or any other follow-up title such as a Persona 6 Dancing or Persona 6 Arena, it's the ability to say that you romance someone in the main entry, be they a party member or not. Considering Strikers already lets you go on a date with a thief of your choice partway through the story, I really don't think it's too much to ask to let you make that decision as soon as the story starts, and to sprinkle in another acknowledgement of it in a throwaway line or two, maybe a text message from your partner as soon as you come to the city, just to say, they missed you or something. It'd add much better continuity between entries and also feel much nicer and less jarring for the hero to reset to being single between each installment. Those relationships are so sweet, so please let us hold on to them. This didn't irreparably ruin my experience or anything, but it's still something I'd like to see. Making it a choice would avoid wars over quote-unquote canon choices as well. At the very least, I'd appreciate the opportunity to shut Ryuji or Junpei up when they talk about girls. And if I have another final request, it'd be #LetRen-say-something. Because if anything, he has more personality than the other Persona leads, so it'd be really nice to give him the Persona 4 Arena treatment where he is, fully voiced and his own entity instead of us having to extrapolate personality traits from him. Because especially in Strikers, you actually pick up on a lot of new aspects of him, some of which are quite funny, that we wouldn't have gone before, and I'd love to see these getting touched on in much more detail. And after all of that, finally my verdict. Strikers is a fantastic experience from beginning to end, with a great story that challenges the thieves in a whole new way, and mechanics that blend the warrior style with Personas in a clever and natural approach. Par for the course with Koei Tecmo's crossovers, but still worth mentioning. They really just get better and better at doing this, and if they really are planning a Strikers 2 due to Scramble's surprising popularity in Japan, I'd love to see it. And while the spectacle would have to be dialed down even further, I think this mix of real-time and menu-based combat would be awesome to see in the mainline series too. To be more specific, I'm thinking something along the lines of how Final Fantasy VII Remake does combat. But that's up to Atlus or whoever they work with for their next works. For now, I'm more than happy to give Strikers a full 4 out of 4 for the sheer joy I got out of it. Keep in mind that this equates to about a 9 or a 10 out of 10 on a traditional scale, because Strikers isn't perfect. I got 2 freezes over the course of my experience, and I wish the early game was a bit easier on resources, and I wish load times were faster as well, but I'm willing to give that last part a pass, except on the Switch version where the load times can take around 30 seconds. The sound mixing is a little odd in places too, but that's understandable as everyone was recording from home for obvious reasons. Despite that, however, I wish all versions had separate volume settings for voices and music, not just the PC version. As you've no doubt noticed from the footage, I'm on PS4, so naturally that wasn't an option for me. That would have been an easy fix in my eyes, but again, it doesn't affect the score. But the one thing that did affect my perception of Strikers, and this is in a positive way, is that almost the entirety of the main story is fully voiced. I really can only think of one major story scene that wasn't, for whatever reason. Now, obviously this was easier to do here than in Royal because, and this depends on your preference in game genres and playstyles, but the story of Strikers is roughly only a third the length of Royal, so naturally there's less ground to cover in the voice actors' parts. But it still helped everything feel so crisp and active throughout, and again, I really loved it. It helps that everyone clearly loves what they do and are having a ton of fun voicing these characters in the process as well. So I really hope this continues, or better yet, we get a 100% voice title as with Fire Emblem since 2017. Though, admittedly, especially for the main line, which I wouldn't be surprised if that takes a really, really long time to come to fruition, given how much dialogue there is. And while this didn't factor into my score either, if you want to get the Platinum Trophy, prepare to do a lot of grinding. Thankfully, there's a pretty efficient method for it, but it'll still take you several hours of monotony to get, so I recommend you get a podcast or YouTube video going in the background while you work through it all. The result is a screen so full of gold and so shiny though that it'll make the old Morgana faint on the spot, so, there's a definite plus side to putting in the effort as well. And even throughout all of this, I still haven't mentioned the bonus digital content. This comes in the form of a bonus app that contains an art book, an hour-long behind-the-scenes video for the making of 2 of Striker's lyrical tracks, and the entirety of Striker's soundtrack. I can't show most of it because they're meant for those who have already experienced Strikers, but I can still say that it's an awesome thing to include for free. It's no Thieves' Den from Royal, of course it isn't, but it's still such a treat to go through, especially the video, which Royal of course doesn't have. I hope we get one of the 2 approaches to bonus content in every title going forward, because honestly it's all fantastic stuff. And with that, thank you all for making it this far. I hope you liked my review. Please let me know what you thought of it or Strikers in the comments below, and whether this convinced you to give it a try, or even if it convinced you not to. If you like this video, please consider liking and sharing it to help others see it too, and even consider subscribing to help me out as well. If you really liked your time here, I also have a Patreon and Ko-fi you can support if you so choose. Thank you again very much for watching, and as always, have a great day.